Works. Ready? Good evening. Thank you for coming out. At least it's a little bit drier tonight than it was last night. I was just telling folks that we've been really busy trimming trees and catching up with all the sidewalks in the neighborhood. All this darn wind and saturated ground has now ruined half of the sidewalk repairs that we've done. But you know, you can't predict these things. It's quite the challenge out there. But we are doing everything we can to catch up on all the trees. And I know we've had some issues with the poplar trees being removed and creating weeds in the backyard, but I was just telling people that we had virtually no property damage this winter from any of the trees because we did get those trees removed. And so hopefully the insurance company should at least send us a nice note for all the, plus a lot of our sound walls that we didn't have to replace as well. So it's been an interesting winter, to say the least. So I'm Steve Pinkerton. I'm the general manager here. I've been here for, let's see, 3 years, 7 months, and 17 days now in Mountain House. And it's been really exciting to be here as our community continues to grow. And it's been a real interesting adventure as I learn more and more about the history and and as you know, history is kind of the prelude that describes everything that's happening today. And unfortunately, you're here tonight because we stumbled over some of the history that's not so good. And we'll go in a little more detail and try to answer all your questions before you have questions. And what we've made a much shorter presentation than last night. We had good practice last night when we did the first of these two town hall meetings. And Bernice Tingle, who's the president of the board of directors this year, she'll be here shortly. She had another meeting, but she's going to be here as well. But we're finding that when you do have questions, and we've had these meetings, we're kind of doing a hybrid now, where we find that what happens, particularly when we have people online as well, if we start having an interaction back and forth with the audience, the people online don't know what's going on. And so what has worked pretty well is we ask everyone, both online, especially online, because it's hard to understand people online a lot of the time, if you end up having a question, and like I said, I'm going to try to answer a lot of your questions during the initial presentation, but we're here as long as we need to have a discussion and explain this very, very frustrating process for everybody. But go ahead and submit the question, and then once we've answered all the questions, then I can go around the room, we can hand the mic around and have additional dialogue if people have additional comments. But I want to make sure we treat the folks online well. So really be conscious of the fact that if you have a question, let me bring the microphone to you so that everybody can hear it, so we don't get the same question a whole number of times. But we've got pens here and we've got pens in the back. So if you have a question, just bring it up. I think we've got one already from last night, but wanted to give you a little background on why we're here. And first of all, I really want to apologize for this. This is something that just is maddening to all of us. It's one of those things where we'll describe it. It goes back a long period of time. It's still mind-boggling that neither a citizen or a staff member in almost 20 years was able to discover this discrepancy in the process that's now created all this angst. And as I'll describe, because of some of the restrictions we have under the law, it's really, we want to have as equitable a resolution as possible, but our hands are also somewhat tied because we're your fiduciary. We have to make sure that the tens of millions of dollars that flow through the district each year meet all of the laws. And as all of us know that have to deal with bureaucracies and government and laws in general, a lot of times these laws are well-meaning, but they sometimes get in the way of what makes sense. So we have to try to find a way to do what's best for the community, but at the same time, we have to be a good guardian of your funds and stay within the law. So that's kind of the overall theme we wanted to understand is we're just as frustrated as you are. We apologize that you have to be here tonight and you have to go through this awful process. But, you know, somebody back in 2002 who put a process together, left a step out of the process, and here we are. And we're going to own it, and we're going to fix it to the best of our ability. Just one more overview reminder is, and I had some of these questions last night, and I've gotten some of these on email, I've gotten phone calls. Sometimes I like to just remind folks that we are a special district. We are not yet a city. We're going through the process of becoming a city. We're a special district with a lot more powers than a typical special district. We have all the powers of a city except for planning and zoning. We can't do zoning. We don't have a planning commission, so we don't determine what gets built. We do dictate all of what's called the horizontal work within the community. So everything other than your house, everything other than your house. So the street, the sidewalk, the parks, the schools, all of that is the responsibility of the Community Services District. And since 2008, when you reached the threshold of 1,000 registered voters, the district, which was initially put together by some developers back in the late 80s and early 90s in concert with San Joaquin County, they created the district itself in 1996. In 2001, in May, they broke ground on Wickland. First folks moved into Wickland in July of 2003. All during that initial time when all this was getting set up, the Board of Supervisors served also as the Board of Directors for the district and used county staff to implement a lot of the initial work that was done here. And then over time, we took on more staff. And then when we got those 1,000 registered voters at the 2008 November election, you elected your first Board of Directors. And then every 2 years, you elect either 2 or 3 of your board members. We still, Bernice and Andy Sue have been on the board since the very beginning. The other folks are a little bit newer. And then they hire me as the general manager to be responsible for the day-to-day operations of the district. We do have staff that deals with a lot of the development issues, that deals with a lot of the finance, but we still use the county. We do contract with the county for things like technology and for sending out our checks. We also use the county sheriff for public safety. We use French Camp for fire. And most pertinent to this evening, our operation of all our utilities and our utility billing is done by a private company, French company, Infomark. Most of your private utility companies are now large multinational corporations, for better or worse. And we are looking in this, we are on 5-year contracts with Infomark. Right now, we're going through about a $60 million expansion of the wastewater plant, because if you've noticed when you drive on Byron Road, there's the next 6,000, 5,000 lots are going to start getting built north of Byron in neighborhood J, the first of the 4 neighborhoods that are going to be north of Byron Road. And so we need to expand the sewer plant for that. But once we get done with the construction, we're at a point in time where we periodically go out to bid for the operation of the water and wastewater and maintenance of our stormwater system, and that will happen next year. And given a lot of the frustrations we've had with utility billing, we are going to be looking at both whether or not we want to go with a private company again, or whether or not we want to bring in-house all of the utility billing. And I won't bore you here with all the pros and cons. In fact, I tried to last night and they said, shut up, let's just talk about tonight. So I'll stop at that point. I just wanted to give you that overview. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that the county still is responsible for the inspection of each house as it's built, and we're essentially responsible for everything else. The one place where that overlaps is your water utility, where that's the one time we step on the private property during the construction process and coordinate with the home builder to place a water meter on your property when it's built. And that was the, you know, that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, what is the coordination of that process and what happened there that we, again, very frustrated with. So let's go ahead and start the PowerPoint. Wanted to quickly give you an overview of what's on your utility bill. And that will quickly relate to this big giant map over here that folks can come up and take a look at if they want to, once we get to that point. And so in your utility bill, you're paying for water, wastewater, or sewage, whatever you want it, and stormwater. And that's essentially Mountain House Creek, which was well-sized, as you can tell. When we've had these storm events, you can see why Mountain House Creek exists. And no, you're not allowed to whitewater raft in there. That's not something that I don't think the beavers like that when we try to go in there and raft. And then besides, that's for a storm event. For your normal events, when it rains, all of the stormwater either collects on Central Parkway or De Anza. And if it's on Central, it ends up in the detention basin with that ghost bike down there, the brand new one at Grant Line and Central. Or if it's closer to De Anza, it goes up and under Byron Road, and we've got another storm detention facility right next to the bridge to nowhere, which should be a bridge to somewhere within about a year. And so that's the stormwater services. Any community built after about the 1980s has much stricter requirements on stormwater than if your community was built before then. And we also have, we have booster stations because we got to make sure the water can make it to different places. We have water pressure issues to deal with. All that is within the cost of running those three utilities. And like in every other community, the utilities are what called an enterprise fund, where all the money that is spent on when you pay your rate, all the money on that rate has to stay within that fund, and only whatever you pay for water, wastewater, and storm can only be used towards water, wastewater, and storm. It's not going into paying for recreation programs or anything else. It's its own enterprise where all you're paying for is the cost of operation, the cost of maintenance, and any cost for long-term replacement of the assets. So that's what you pay for in that bill. And every 5 years, and we did it last year, we go through a process where we evaluate what the costs are going to be over the next 5 years for those operations. And then we have a very specialized consultant that even the big cities use. Nobody does this in-house. And there's a formula you come up with that projects what your costs are going to be over the next 5-year period. Everybody gets a letter in the mail. There's a public hearing, and then the rates are established for the next 5 years. That's on water and wastewater. The stormwater is under a different set of regulations, or less regulations, actually. Now, the other bonus, and I say that and with sarcasm, that you have here in Mountain House is you also have what's on your bill called what we all have in the bill is called the debt service component, or the debt component. And there's a number of things we'll talk about tonight. I always remind my staff that when you work in Mountain House, you come here from any other city you worked in, you have to start thinking about you're driving on the left side of the road instead of the right side of the road, because everything was done so differently here. Because when the builders were the developer was trying to put Mountain House together, the county had been going through a process where the county had no money anymore, and they said, you can build, but we aren't going to give you a penny, and you're not going to get any of our property tax. We're not even going to let you use our full faith and credit to help establish. We support you putting a nice standalone community instead of building houses in the middle of nowhere that don't have sewage treatment and things like that. However, developer, you are completely on your own, and you have to fund upfront the cost of everything. So when the first house in Wickland was built, the developer at that point had spent about $250 million on the initial sewer, water, storm, interchange, Mountain House Parkway, the park, dedicating the land for the school. And then as fees come in, the builder then gets, the developer then gets reimbursed for all of that cost. Now, for your roads and your parks and buildings like this, all of the reimbursables, as we call them, because we essentially purchase those facilities. We purchase the roads, we purchase the parks from the developer essentially, and then we pay them back through the fees that the builder pays when he comes in for his building permit when it comes to parks and roads. And on a single family house these days, Sarah, what is that? About 20,000 a house on parks and about 10 or 12,000 on roads. Commercial pays a lot more than that for roads because they typically generate more traffic. There's a whole science that goes into how you charge those fees. The other thing that's normally charged with the building permit is what's called your connection fees, meaning you have to buy into the water plant, the sewer plant, and the storm drainage system. So in any other city that you were to live in, the home builder fronts the cost for paying toward reimbursing the developer or the city in most places for the cost of all of the utilities, but not in Mountain House. The builder back in 1998, frankly, when houses were about $150,000, was very concerned that if the home builder had all these other fees that he had to pay, plus he had to build the roads and everything else, if he also had to pay a connection fee for water and sewer, there might not be any land value left for him to sell it because he was so worried about the making them. Certainly when he hit the market in 2002, things were different, but when he was establishing the financing plan, since he was fronting the cost of the utilities anyway, instead of getting that money back from the home builder who was going to take it off the price of the land, he decided we're going to put that on the future homeowner instead. And so every year he will then sweep up the dollars that are coming out of the utility bill just for the pledge, which is called the pledge facility component or debt service. And that money goes to pay down the cost of the utilities. And so that's the debt you're always hearing about and people are talking about is there's been about 200 million so far spent on the three utilities. We've got another 125 million, depending on what happens with inflation, to go. In fact, the sewer plant's about 60 or $61 million. That's going to be complete next year. And what we do over time is the interest payment we have to pay the builder was again negotiated before we existed. And it's not a great, it's set each year by the construction cost index. It's not a fixed rate. So what we do, and it's part of the agreement with the developer from the beginning, is every time there's enough money, new money coming in as houses are being built, and as the utility bill generates more of this component, we then pay off the developer by issuing tax exempt bonds so that we can get this debt at a tax exempt rate instead of the rate we have to pay for the builder. So for example, right now, out of that 200 million in debt, we have about 30 million we owe the builders right now. The rest of these we thankfully financed when interest rates were at the bottom back in 2020, and we did a little bit of it in 2019 as well. And so we owe 200 million, but most of it's in really low rate, fixed rate debt. But there's about 30 million for the builder, and we have to pay interest to the builder on June 30th of each year, and the cost based on the inflation of last year. And so as of June 30th, he'd be receiving an 8.4% interest for this year. So we're going to be working to get bonds issued by May so that we've then again locked in at a lower fixed rate. And for the existing debt, we've then paid off the home builders, and we're not going to pay an extra $1 million, $2 million in interest this year. So we're trying to do everything we can to mitigate that long-term cost, but most of these bonds aren't going to be paid off for another 30 to 40 years. But that's how long it's going to take to complete all the utilities in the community. So again, I wasn't here. I was about 25 miles away when all this happened, but that was what was designed back in the day. And that's what we've inherited. And we're trying to do everything we can to keep that interest cost as low as possible. But I know that's a real source of frustration. Like I said, I think my first day was August 5th, 2019. And I think beginning about July of 2019, I started hearing a lot about why do we have all this debt? And so since I've been here, I've tried to do, with the help of our finance staff, keeping that debt cost as low as possible and trying to keep the construction costs as low as possible. We worked it out with the builder where this next phase of the sewer plant is expandable. We're not building all the way out to build out. We're building it out so it can be easily expanded and hopefully saving $10, $20 million in the future on the wastewater plant. So I know it's a painful cost, but that's the rules that the county set up way back in the day. So you can keep going. So this is calculated based on the water, sewer, and storm rates for this pledged facility charge is based on what is called your EDU. And I hate to use these words, which is basically, it's based on what type of neighborhood you live in. Are you in a neighborhood with larger lots, medium-sized lots, or smaller lots? And up on this map, and I'll talk about this a little more in a second, up on this map shows you, I wish the colors contrasted better, but the lightest yellow are the low-density lots. The brown here is what's called the medium-density lots, and then this orange are the medium-high density lots. And so your rate is a function of a medium-sized lot is considered a standard dwelling unit. So I think if you go to the next page, so the factor, so you take that $46 a month, say for water, and if you're in a medium-sized lot, your factor for water is 1. But if you're in a larger lot, you pay the factor times 1.32. And if you're in a medium-high lot, which is smaller, you pay 0.58. So you pay, so a medium-sized lot pays the $46. A smaller lot pays 58% of $46, and a larger lot pays 132% or 32% more than $46. All right, so the colors, so you can see that this, I guess I would call that a brownish yellow. That is the low density lots, which are 1.32 on water. Those are the lots those are the largest lots. The brown are the medium-sized lots, and mostly those are the ones that surround the schools, if you look here. Wickland, the builder originally was worried about selling houses, so he did a lot more larger houses, you can see in Wickland, than he did in the other neighborhoods originally. And then these kind of an orange color are where you see the 0 lot line houses on the private streets. Those are the ones that are primarily the HOAs. Correct, because when you're doing your rates, and again, this is the methodology that meets the law. When you are sizing your plant, you make the assumption is, and the assumption has scientific backing. If you're in a large lot, you're likely going to have a larger house and a larger yard. And again, this is overall. It's not, you can never tailor a rate based on the exact thing that happens on each person's property. I actually tried to do that in one city, and it was not, the controversies of trying to, when you try to get too fair, it's worse than one that everybody's kind of dissatisfied with. But when you are sizing your water plant, a low density lot, on average, because it has a yard and it likely has a larger house, is going to have more impact on the size of the water plant than one of the 0 lot line houses. So that's how this cost of construction is spread out. So the larger the house, the larger your factor. So a medium-sized house is considered the average house. So it pays the $46 times 1. And so if you're a smaller house, there's no yard in these 0 lot line houses, so they're not going to use any outdoor water at all. And as you know, in a lot of houses in the summer, 70–80% of your use could be your outdoor water, although everybody's getting much better at that. And in the new houses, it's not as bad. But the bigger thing is the indoor use is typically going to be much larger in a low density than a medium high density. And again, there's always exceptions to the rule. But if you look over the 15,662 lots that are planned for Mountain House, and I think we're at about 7,600 right now, that they do this, and the apartments actually have a whole different factor, but I don't want to confuse that. But there's a whole science that goes into sizing these plans, and you have to do it in a methodology that can be deemed a fair sharing of the costs. If you're in a tiny little house with no yard that's never going to consume more than 50 gallons a day, should that house be paying the same as a house that in the summer could be doing 2,000 gallons a day? And so that, it's based on the zone you're in, which generally has larger lots. So they don't do it by your house size. Now your special tax, which we could talk about afterwards, that's based on lot size and a function of the house. But typically the methodology for utilities that we put together is based on lot. Now we're going to explain in a second that back when we did this, we were like the first municipality to do it this way. Typically, if you have a 1-inch meter, you know, it used to be that a lot of times the smaller houses had a 3/4-inch meter and the larger houses had a 1-inch, and sometimes larger houses had 2 meters even. So it used to be just tied into what nowadays everybody just gets a 1-inch meter if you're in a single family home. But it used to be, in most places, it was tied to meter size. Now you're seeing more municipalities try to tie it more to this more scientific methodology. So in any case, hold that thought, because this whole density is a real important factor in everything we're going to try to get through as quickly as possible. So on to the next slide. And the factors are a little different now in sewage, because the lot size isn't as important on sewage, because sewage is only indoor use. There isn't as much difference between large and small lots. So the EDU factor is a little different on sewage than it is on water. So again, that was all done by, certified engineers following best practices at the time. And so I think I already explained the density, but the low density is typically what they look at as units per acre. And so a low density, you'll have 4 or 5 units per acre. And that includes that's typically your 8,000 square foot lot with roads. You'll get, around 3 to 5 houses per acre in low density. Medium density, you get more like 5 to 8 lots per acre. Those are more your 4,000 to 6,000 square foot lots. And then your medium high are the 0 lot lines that are 2,000 to 3,000 square foot lots. So that's how you measure it from a planning standpoint. So for example, in a low density neighborhood, typically a 10-acre parcel is going to generate 40 houses. In a medium, that's going to generate 60. In a medium high, 120 lots are being built there. The map can tell you what it is. And so I've got it up on the screen, but we thought, obviously the people online can't come up and look at this map. So we've got one up on the screen as well. And there's a lot of extra colors there because that one differentiates between the active adult zoning and the family zoning, but you don't have to worry about, we don't have any active adult neighborhoods yet. There'll be at least 2 up north of Byron. One more reminder is so all these things are then tied back, instead of to meter size, they're tied back to this density factor. So both your debt service charge and your base charges on your operations are based on that. The only thing that is not based, well, there's really 2 things on your bill that are not based on your density. One is your garbage bill, which is just a pass through to West Valley. They don't, your garbage bill is based on the size of your cans. And by the way, we're twisting their arm right now to try to get smaller cans for those that don't have room for the big cans. I think we're about there. Hopefully we're going to have a meeting on that April 19th to talk about the amazing things the state has imposed on trash over the next year. But the other thing that's not based on density is how much water you use above your baseline, your volumetric start. And so if you're a big water user, that's really not dependent on your density. That's just a flat rate depending on how much you use. But your base charges are all based on what density you're in. So on to the next one. And this shows you all the different things. So you have both an operations and maintenance charge. And remember, on the operation and maintenance charge, you not only have your water base fee, but you also have your, what we call the volumetric charge, and that's how much water you actually use. And then you have base fees for storm and sewer on both operations and maintenance and the pledge facility fee. And so you can see those basic charges, the difference in those basic charges between a medium high, medium and low unit, assuming no volumetric charges. You can see it's a significant difference between the 3 land uses. All right, next slide. So what happened? Well, when, I talked earlier about the fact that we have to, when we go on the lot to put the water meter, we have to coordinate with the county. It's the one area where we overlap with the county. But back in 2003, everything was the county. And even the things that the district did was typically a county employee who just for that hour said, okay, I'm working for the community services district for the next hour in my job. And so there was some county employee, I'm sorry, I can't find them. People want a mugshot, but I can't find it. But there was a county employee back in 2003 who probably was called up and said, we just started we're about to put our first water meters in over on, I keep forgetting the name of that street. It's that first one up in the northeast corner of Wickland. But we've got these first houses. We got to set up a process and a procedure for installing water meters in Mountain House that we can then tie into the utility bill, because it's very important that in order to be able to establish a utility bill, you have to have a meter number and you have to tie it to an address, and it's a whole big process to make sure that that happens. And so next slide. So they set that up back in 2003. And what happened is the policy and procedure that was put in place, the person didn't realize that, again, in Mountain House, you drive on the left, you don't drive on the right. And when all the energy in the policy procedure went into making sure the meter data was coded properly and then tied properly to that, not only the home address, but the mailing address of the person. And they made sure that the meter number was tied in the whole bit. I'm not sure they did radio reads yet back then, but that happened a little bit later. So everything was designed like anywhere else in an unincorporated county. And what was not realized by them back then is that this is Mountain House, and 90% of your rate is based on the zone, not based on the meter size. And the setup that was sent on to the utility company, there was all this other thing the person had to fill out on this sheet of paper. It was usually probably the construction superintendent, who's probably got 5 meters to put in that day. And he's, in the back of his construction trailer somewhere trying to figure out how to fill out this form. And he probably just copies the one from the day before. And there was no one who checked to make sure that the form that he filled out, there was no one in the process that said, let's make sure that the zone he writes down, the density he writes down is correct, because that's frankly more important than the meter size. Everything was based on looking at the meter size, not looking at the zoning. Now, back then, if you can see here in Wickland, and one of the other reasons they probably never caught it, was virtually all the first neighborhoods in Wickland were all the same zone. So it was pretty easy for them not to make a mistake. So keep going here. So keep going. So up until the last 5-6 years, virtually everything was either low density or medium density. The only medium high we had were the condos, and the condos don't have individual meters. They have 1 meter for each building, and there's like 4 to 6 units in each building. So they're managed a whole different way. So for the most part, you had a 50-50 chance of getting the zone right, and most of the time they got it right. If you go to the next page, one more page. Probably a little bit hard to see, probably easier to see online. But what we did here is we had a homeowner come in from Langston, which is a medium high. And again, I'm shocked that this didn't happen 10, 15 years ago when the mistakes started. But this was the first person to sit down and work with staff, look through our municipal code, and determine that, wait a second, you're charging me at the low density, not the medium high density, and that's wrong. And so this was brought to our attention, and I said, okay, I want staff to look at all 7,001 residential accounts. And we had a new employee lucky enough to get that assignment and look at every single residential account going back to the beginning of Mountain House. And she put together this wonderful chart, and you can see in 2003, there were 2 that were medium density, that were low density. 2004, there were no mistakes, which is amazing given I think we did like 700 houses that year. 2005, there was 1 mistake. 2006, 9 mistakes. You can see as we got into the recession, and I think most of the home builders probably had like fewer construction superintendents, and we had virtually no staff at that point in time. You see there was about, 10, 12 a year. So virtually all of the very few mistakes during that time, but nobody ever caught these during that time, and nobody ever waved their hand. As you can see, in our first 3,000 units, it was maybe 2% of the units total. And nobody figured it out because for one thing, the costs were a lot lower then. I think there was less motivation for people to look because the price differential was less before we've had all the CPI increases. But then you can see starting in particularly 2019 is where it really took off. And that's because we had a number of neighborhoods where they were building one housing product in like the Briar Square project and the Meritage project here. If you look closely on this map, they're building basically the same house on different size lots. And, the home builders just figured, well, they were all medium density. They weren't medium high density, or they weren't sure at all. And so starting the last 3.5 years, there was a considerable number of mistakes. And this homeowner from Langston came in, 100% of Langston had been, at least they were consistent, had been miscoded. And so we went through every one of these. We calculated out 363 had been coded at a higher zone, meaning they had been charged less during that time. So there's one property since 2005 that's been undercharged the whole time, probably in Wickland or Bethany. But you can see the vast majority of it's the last couple of years. So 360 where it was undercharged and 908 that had been overcharged, and virtually all of those, not all, but the great majority since 2019 is where this happened, and especially the last couple of years where this happened. And so go to the next slide. And you can see how it kind of accumulated. Back in 570 of the overcharges were the last 3 years, virtually all in Briar Square and Langston for the most part. So keep going. So we, of course, have completely rewritten the process, and we've taken more control from the billing folks. And we've been having to do a lot of that lately because, I think the most frustrating thing is we discovered this right after again, we're talking about bringing this in-house. And one of the things that really prompted that was last summer, Infomark brought in a new company to do their billing. And again, we're different. And so the outgoing billing people did not give the memo to the new billing people that we have all these strange ways of doing things. And that's where there were a bunch of mistakes back in July and August that Infomark got a new company. And when they were supposed to do that EDU equivalent, they botched it royally. And that's been kind of the last straw for us with them. So, and all that was last summer. And that's kind of been, frankly, the last straw for us, that we've had to take a lot more control of the process. And in my, again, 3 years, 7 months, 17 days, I've just found that we spend a lot of time going through everything we do. We have a lot of discussions on things that aren't front facing with you, but with the builders and others, where there's so many things now where I'm like, we just have to go back to 2003 and sometimes 1998 and just rebuild all these things. Because, by 2009, when the recession hit, we were pretty much at staffing level at a ghost town. And then we've been building it back up. And frankly, I'd say we're still at about half the level that a lot of communities our size are in, but we also want to deliver a real low cost service to you as well. But, we realize that customer service is critical as well. So we're going to have to spend some money and get some more staff in, because we just can't, we agree, we can't tolerate anything like this again. So we're doing a lot of review of history. I'm hoping I don't think we can find, at least for the retail customer, anything like this, but there's all kinds of weird other stuff that I could bore you with for hours, just related to all the things the builders fight about that have a tortured history that needs to get cleared up as well. But we're trying to get this fixed. We're really focused on, our goal is to make sure you get the best service possible. I'm also our staff is working really hard and putting a lot of pressure on the builders to get caught up on some of the parks and the other amenities, because of our other goal around here is to make sure that when you move in a neighborhood, it's not your great grandkids who get to play in the park. We want the park to come now. And so we're about to have some arm wrestling matches on Central Park so that we can get we've got a beautiful expansion plan that the builders have to do for Central Park. The way the requirements are written, there's really not a lot of motivation to do that, but we're working on giving them some motivation. But that's a side issue. The main issue is we're going to clean this up. Whether we do the utility billing in the future or not, we're going to have our hands much deeper in it, because there are some challenges to bringing billing in-house just because of the cost of software and things like that. But we're going to be having discussions, public discussions, about the pros and cons of bringing all the billing in-house, because this was the last straw. So we have got a process in place now where I can guarantee you this mistake will not happen again. We inherited it. It's our fault. We're not going to let it happen again. So next slide. If it'll let you. So here's the real frustration that I have. And I've been a bureaucrat longer than I'd like to admit. I first started paving streets 45 years ago, so I've been doing this a while. And one of the things that I'm a resident just like you are, and I get just as, believe it or not, I probably get more frustrated with government than most of you do, because we have the state every year spends all this time in the legislature coming up with things that they think are well-intentioned, but some of those things are making you mad and making me mad right now, because we get ourselves hamstrung. And so here we've got this situation where we've got people such as yourselves that have been overcharged for anywhere from 1 to 20 years, mostly 1 to 3 years. But the state law tells us that under the Government Claim Tort Act, that if you do not make us aware of an error that was our fault, not your fault, but if you do not make us aware of that error within 1 year, the state says you have no obligation to do anything about that error if you don't figure it out within a year. And in fact, and if you think it's more fair to go out further years, they're not saying you can't do it, but they're also essentially saying that if someone else, say the other 5,700 utility bill owners who aren't in this situation, one of them might say, well, yes, that was really unfair that they had to be overcharged for all those years. But if you give them more, that's a gift of public funds. And there are attorneys out there that love those sorts of things. And of course, the law has all kinds of whereases and hereases. So the simple thing would be to say to you, we're going to make you whole. That's the fair thing. That's how we should do it. Now, the folks last night weren't real thrilled that, and I don't know if any of you tonight were on the group that was undercharged, but technically we're under the law. We're essentially obligated that if we've made a mistake, we have up to 3 years to fix that mistake. And so, the board really wrestled with this and said, it's not really fair that under the law, we have to ask someone to pay back 3 years, but at the same time, they're telling us we can only get you 1 year. That's not fair. So the board's compromise was, all right, let's make it 3 and 3. And we know a lot of people are going to be upset because there's a lot of folks who were overcharged for 4, 5, 6 years, but there has to be a point where we draw the line from it's really a risk mitigation. They could just say, we're going to pay everybody back 20 years, but the more you push your luck, the more we as your fiduciary have to say, well, what if somebody says, no, district, you shouldn't have refunded that extra $300,000 and we're going to sue you, and this person's going to collect $100 and his attorney probably $100,000, and then we're going to have to spend $100,000 in staff time to then put a charge back on your bill. And so that's kind of the conundrum we're in right now. And that's why it took us a month or two to get all this going, is because we're trying to figure out, we're in a situation here where people are going to be mad no matter what, and we don't like that. We want to provide good customer service, but the law puts us in this position where being completely fair, we're technically putting the district at fiscal risk, and the district is us, right? And so that's, you know, for Sarah and I in particular, that's our biggest obligation. We don't like to wear orange jumpsuits. We have to at least advise and do what we think is fiscally responsible. And unfortunately, sometimes that leaves us in this situation where that's just wrong. And it's kind of like, you know, we have these water rights over here that are supposed to be guaranteed. And we've gone to court. BBID has gone to court to show that our water rights are guaranteed. And we now have a state that says, well, because we're going to just continually appeal that, you're going to have to spend a lot of money making sure you have a backup water supply, because we, the state, have decided that, you know, if we decide that your water is going to put the Delta at risk, or they're going to put everybody in Southern California at risk, we're going to take your water away. And that frankly keeps me up at night just as much as frustrations like this, that we will be coming back probably in a couple months to talk to you more about our water challenges. We think we have the state dead to rights, and they apparently don't care. And so we are gonna, and the biggest thing I was taught in city manager school many years ago, it's not really a school, it's just people yelling at you, is whatever you do, the water has to flow and the toilets have to flush. That is job 1 and 1A. And July 7th of this year, I got an email about 7 in the morning, and I had to go and make sure your toilet's flushed. That's how close we were with the state. And we basically had to, I'm not going to put it on the report, you basically had to ignore the state to make sure that didn't happen. So those are the things that we're also dealing with at this point in time. So I can tell you, I feel your pain, because we have folks who, we think that everything we put in place that was put in place 20 years ago for water is guaranteed. But we're probably going to have to spend, you know, the attorneys are going to win again, and water attorneys are not cheap. So that's another challenge we have. But for you, I know that's a secondary issue to the issue we have tonight, but I just wanted to explain to you why we're not saying the customer's always right. Here's 7 years, here's 5 years. And it's because we have to mitigate that against the risk that you, as we, the district, could take for a lawsuit. So next slide. I think there's a next slide. So we've already really talked about that, but the other thing that our attorneys have advised us, and I know this is a pain in the neck, because again, none of this is your fault, is in order to make sure that the attorneys have advised us that for us to give you the 3 years, you have to give us a release saying you're not going to sue us for the rest of the years. And that has to be notarized. And so we will provide notary services. You'll be able to, I think, is that on the next slide, I think? Oh, that's the letter you got. So that's all 3 pages crammed together. So keep going. We can't, like I said, we're taking risk. This may not make you feel any better, but remember, 100% of that money has to stay in the water fund, the sewer fund, and the stormwater fund.
You also, as soon as you move, you're gonna have to start paying extra for debt that we incurred before you were to get here, right?
Right.
And not to mention, the water quality ain't even that great. I mean, it's pretty bad water quality.
You're correct.
And I'm trying to $300 a month when I've never seen anything like that.
Right. And again, I'll go ahead and answer, but we wanted to get through the presentation and then we can have the discussion, because I want the people online to hear it. But I feel your pain. And as I explained earlier, when this community was established, the county and the developer created this system where instead of the home builder paying for the connection fee, it was put on the ultimate purchaser of the property. And regarding the water, I agree, it's not great water quality here, but it's the only water we could get. And believe it or not, even though it's not great water, it's actually more expensive to get this water. We're not the Bay, we don't have all this additional water. Just like if you lived in Tahoe, you'd be paying for snow removal. There's certain things that are geographic. If you live out here at the edge of the valley where we frankly don't even have groundwater we can tap into within the city, it's just a higher cost of doing business here. Just like even if you're over in Tracy or Lathrop, if you move into River Islands or Tracy Hills, you're paying a lot more taxes in those neighborhoods than you are in the other neighborhoods in the community, just because of what it took to build those neighborhoods and what the rules were at the time. And the big thing why our property taxes are higher, River Islands taxes are higher, and Tracy Hills taxes are higher is when these neighborhoods were established, it was at a time where the state needed more money to fund schools. And because your property taxes don't fully pay for the schools, and that's a 2-day conversation, but take my word for it. And so back in 1992, the state, was it 92 or 91? 91 and 92, the state took half of the county's property tax and gave it permanently to the schools. It's called the ERAF. Just type in Educational Revenue Augmentation Fund. So what that meant was any annexations or any cities established after 1992 were not going to ever get any more property tax from the counties, because the county lost half their property tax. And frankly, the county property tax is barely enough to pay for social services and things like that. And so it's partly being a victim of geography. It's partly being timing. And I can tell you, you go into anywhere, any newer development in the valley, and because you don't have that county share, it's more expensive. And then on top of that, when you're the last one in, everybody else has already gotten their piece of the water. There wasn't a lot of water left when Mountain House was being established. So this is the best water we got. And it's a challenge. You have others. We also have issues with salt in the water that contributes to the cost of our water. When I was city manager of Manteca, you have levels of arsenic in water that for 100 years were fine, and then the state kept changing the regulations. So even though Manteca has groundwater, they have to bring in additional water to dilute the arsenic. And so there's different circumstances within every city, depending on arsenic, depending on salt. I could bore you to death on that, so I'll shut up. But you understand it's really hard to compare cost of operation from one community to the next when it comes to utilities, which is why we go through this Prop 218 process that evaluates for the geographical circumstances we have here, what is the cost of running your plants? And then that's the charge that comes to the property owner. Well, in theory, the home builder, when the home builder is selling the house, in theory, we could debate this, but in theory, he didn't have that extra $30,000 cost. It's getting passed on to you. For example, in here, and you also have the CFDs here as well for the schools. And actually what they do over in Nevada, for example, is you come in, you buy the house, and then they put the bonds on the house for the schools and everything else. It's done. The builders have these different ways of doing it in every state. Oh no, I'm not crying any crocodile tears. Trust me. I have, well, no, I won't show you all the scars I have from these guys. So. Well, a good chunk of your bill is to pay for the utilities out of your bill instead of out of your purchase price. In any other community you live in, you're going to be buying the water bill, that the capital side is normally included in the purchase price, but not in Mountain House.
Steve, can we repeat questions
Sure.
from the audience?
Yeah, I apologize.
Because they can't.
I apologize. So they were asking simply about the cost of the water bill, why it's higher in Mountain House, and it's because of these geographical issues and the fact that the builder, the cost of construction of the plants is passed on here. So next slide, I think, will show you, or is that the last slide? So we've got this up here. You can email or call us to schedule a free notary appointment. We know that's a huge pain in the neck for you to have a notary, and we have notaries scheduled to be here for you at the district, so you don't have to go through the process of finding a notary. And I think we've already had a lot of them signed up, and you have a sheet here you can sign up on too for that service. But again, legally, that's something that we're required to do in order to process through the refund. You know, again, as a special district, we are a creature of the law. We have to stay within the boundaries of the law that are dictated. And we're trying to do our best to make sure this process is as painless as possible. It's a pain. We all feel the pain. It's consumed all of us for 3 months. We've tried to come up with the best solution possible without creating any future tail liability. We really welcome the opportunity to explain to you how all these things are done, because yes, they are convoluted, but again, that's what happened back in the 90s. To get from Mountain House to exist, everything had to be done in reverse here and differently, or frankly, the county wasn't going to allow Mountain House to get built at all. And we are here doing everything we can to mitigate a lot of the costs that were incurred back in that time. Like I said, they're not gonna get that 8% payment this year. We're gonna be paying them off before June 30th, so they don't get any interest this year, much to their chagrin. But again, I've worked in municipalities from 8,000 to 500,000. None of them are Mountain House, but I think Mountain House also has a lot of good qualities. There's nowhere else where you have, find me another community that's has 100% of their neighborhoods with street trees and the parkway and the sidewalks. And I think eventually we're gonna have an amazing town center over here that you can get in. So we just wanna try to take the good with the bad. We wanna get this solved. And I can tell you that we will have a lot of public information as we go through this process for how we're gonna be doing utility billing in the future. And we apologize for all the headaches that we've created in the past, and we're trying to do everything we can to minimize that potential in the future. And at the same time, the top goal that I can tell you're working on tirelessly is make sure your water does continue to flow. We do want it to taste a little better. I mean, there wasn't much water left in the Delta last summer. It was quite a challenge. In fact, we had water pumped in from other parts of San Joaquin County to try to get some more water last summer, so that we did have a little better water quality than we would have otherwise, because we all tasted it, and you should have tasted it before we put all that stuff in there. It was nothing to write home about, but we're trying to do our best on that. And we're completely rebuilding our sewer plant right now, and it's kind of like changing the jet engine while you're flying the plane. And so a lot of energy is going in to make sure there's no issues with your wastewater service as well. And in fact, one of the things we're doing is we're trying to perfect our water rights. When we put all that sewage, remember, all the water we get was sewage from somebody else coming up the river. So we want that credit as well. You can actually get credit for the sewage you put in the water to add to your water rights in a drought and things like that. We're also potentially looking at, when we build the lakes in the north, to see whether or not those can be a backup water supply as well. And we're trying to perfect some additional sources of water, as well as working with Tracy in the industrial park down there to get a backup supply of water as well. And so those are kind of we want to make sure that these utility bills make sense, and we want to make sure that you've always got flowing water. That's our biggest focus. So why don't we go ahead? It's a small group. Why don't I go ahead and just pass the microphone around, and I'll do 3 questions before we take some of the questions off the chat. Is that okay? We'll do 3 questions here, and then we'll do the chat. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a specific question about my property, and I don't want to talk about here. So okay, so I'll talk to you. I mean, how do I reach you? Okay, all right, okay. Thank you.
All right, next question.
So we are charging people back for the last 3 years and refunding the last 3 years, right? What is the timeline that we have for people to pay back? Because we did this over the last, 50, 20 years. Do we have they have a year to pay it back, or do they have more than that?
For those who are overcharged, we would spread it out over 36 payments. 36, right? Undercharged. So on the undercharged, it would be 36 payments. I'm sorry, these things are all melding together.
So how do we know if we're overcharged or undercharged?
You would have received a letter from us. So if you didn't receive a letter, you're one of the, let's see, 5,130 people who did not have an error on their coding. That letter went out 2 weeks ago. So I'll have Sarah take down your name and she will double check to make sure that you got your letter. Because of course, the other challenge we have is some people send their letter to their tenant or their property manager. Mhm.
Our friends who are overseas are renting out the properties over here. And the bills are still in their name, but the renters don't know, and we don't want them, like, we're kind of overseeing some of the properties, so we don't want to lean on the property. So how do we kind of figure that out, that we can address that question?
We had a lot of questions about the liens last night, and we understand the concern on that. And so on the people who are undercharged, we're going to probably have an additional dialogue because of some of the issues related to the liens. So nothing's going to be decided on that until May 1st on the undercharges. Because there are some mechanical issues, and, you know, there's concerns with people who are tenants that if their landlord gets this, they're going to think it's something they didn't pay. And so again, this was through no fault of anyone. So we want to make sure that we follow the law, but we also don't create any more of a headache than we have to. So do we have a couple online questions? Oh, here they are. So one's asking whether or not so first of all, you can dispute this, but if you dispute this, if you disagree with, first of all, you need to confirm that you received a letter or email us at the address up here on the screen to make sure someone else didn't get the letter if you have a concern. Again, it's about 18% of the units that had a disparity, most of those from the last 4 years. And so if you're overcharged, if you want 3 years, you can sign the waiver. If you want more than 3 years, you would have to go through a legal process to ask for it. But again, under the law, we believe that we're only obligated under the law and required under the law to do 1 year. And so that's really the next question. Why are we only getting 3 years? And as I explained, the challenge we have is we're already going above and beyond what the law allows us. And the further we go beyond what the law allows, the more we may be at risk for some kind of class action lawsuit from those not impacted. So that was again, the risk management, the judgment we made. How do we know our rate today? So the rate the rate that you have now should be correct. If you would like to check on whether or not you think the zone is correct, you would go on the county. I think the best thing to do would be to put it back on the screen. Is it off the screen now? Put it back to the MHCSD Utilities website, and a staff person will get back to you right away to let you know what your rate is. For those of you in the room, you can just sign up right over here for that. So one of the other things there's been questions on here is we're going to be doing this as a credit against your account. Because what we find is there's a couple of things we find. If we were to send out a physical check, first of all, that costs a lot of money. Secondly, and more importantly, in many cases, when we send a check out, if it's a property manager or a rental property, we often end up getting in big disputes over who is supposed to receive the check. So to make sure there is no question that we are sending the refund to the appropriate place, the credit goes against the account. And if you move in a month, you would then get a check at that point in time. And by the way, the other challenge we have with checks is no matter how good and professional we make look these checks, you'd be shocked at what percentage of our checks that we send out when people terminate, how many of those never get cashed. And so we think to make sure that everybody's getting the account and there's no confusion, no problems with the mail or what address, we know you're gonna get, if you get it credited to your account, we know that you're gonna get that refund. And when were the bills rectified? Was it in February or January? January. The bills were rectified as of January. Some were actually rectified, I think, a little before that in Langston. I think there were some in November as well over in the Langston neighborhood. All right, we've got one more question. You have to come on the microphone so people can hear you. You don't have to come up. I'll come to you. I need the steps.
So for the people who are undercharged, their bill was X amount previously, right? Now, is that bill gonna go up then to what it should be? And then on top of that, they still have to pay if they do a monthly payment.
But again, we're still working out the mechanics of that because we don't want to make this process any more miserable than it has to be. How long until it's credited to the bill? Well, once you get it notarized and send it to us, it should go on the next month's bill. And you have until June 1 to process this. And is it definite that refunds cannot be based on personal circumstances? No, I'm sorry, but we have to treat everyone equal. That always invites a lawsuit is the challenge. And again, if we get sued, that comes out of all of our pockets as well. That's the challenge. Everything related to the utilities gets charged against the utilities. So we've had this question before, is the builders made the mistake, we failed to check the mistake. Again, this goes back to the very beginning of time. It was our responsibility to check the builder's mistake. We're past 1 year with the builders. We couldn't go after them if we wanted to on all of these. And so if someone feels like they're wrong, they have that right. They don't have to sign this. They can go privately do it, but we can just tell you from reviewing the law, unfortunately, the law limits it to, the Claims Act limits it to 1 year. That, we wish we could do more, but we're doing 2 more years than that and taking a risk in doing that, but we think that's what should be fair. So why do they have to get it notarized? Because because it's a legal document that not to sue. So for those who were undercharged, how do we make sure it is correct? I would, if you want to get it detailed, I would email that mhcsdutilities@sjgov.org, and you can get a personalized printout. We can't put it on the screen tonight because each one of your utility bill is your business and nobody else's. So we have to verify that it's the right person requesting that information. That's why we can't just give a printout. Each individual owner, because of privacy, we should do it that way. So isn't keeping the money that is not yours stealing? Again, the money in this account is the community's account. All the money, none of this money was diverted from the, none of this money was diverted from water, wastewater, and stormwater. And, the challenge is we had almost as much money that was not charged to people as was charged. So essentially, some folks helped out other folks in the neighborhood. But again, we're just really constrained under the law in what we can do. And under the Government Claims Act, if it's more than a year, the government agency has no liability. And again, we'd love to pay it back to the beginning of time because we think that's the fair thing to do, but we're constrained. So how would you know a mistake is made? Well, again, we're very surprised that normally in my experience, because governments are not perfect, mistakes usually get figured out. I think the challenge here was, it's amazing that in this entire time of 19 years leading to this date, no one ever discovered the mistake. But each year a mistake was made. Now, each month a mistake was made. Okay, why can't I get help with my questions regarding tree removal, just go ahead and send it to the email address up there and staff will get it to the appropriate person, to the mhcsdutilities@sjgov.org. And then there's a question about fire and safety, and we do have a full complement fire department right now, and we are getting ready to expand our fire department to go when the first house is built north of Byron Road, we will have a second fire station and additional staffing. The whole discussion about advanced life support is a longer discussion that has to do with, that's a county issue that we're still wrestling with. If you're interested, we have a public safety committee meeting once a month on the fourth Thursday of the month where they have discussions on that. In fact, we're having one tomorrow night at 7 o'clock here at Town Hall. So how did we catch the issue? We had a homeowner, as I said earlier, who did catch the issue, and that was back around November. And then we had a staff person or two essentially full-time going through and rectifying that since that point in time. All right, and regarding the map, once we were complete tonight, based on the questions we received the last 2 nights, we're going to be putting all this on our website, and we will include that zoning map on the website as well. And I think the other thing we should do is I'll give you the link to the county website where they can look up their zoning address by address as well. So why is the district not asking builders and Infomart to share when they get the profits? Now, we pay a flat cost to Infomart. None of these costs really benefit the home builders or Infomart. We just pay Infomart for their costs. All the rest of this stays in the fund for additional improvements that we have to do. And you know, if you're more interested in our budget and the rate study we went through last year, again, just email us at that mhcsdutilities@sjgov.org. And so again, there's another question, frustrated that if we didn't know, how could we dispute? And I share that pain, that believe me, if we had known, all of us, and by the way, I want to introduce our board president, Bernice Tingle, who's been here since 2003, and she can tell you if she had known, she would have got it rectified right away. But we didn't even have a board of directors when this was done back in 2003. We were just a little sub-agency of the county when all of this was put in place. And as I said earlier, we're looking through every nook and cranny now to make sure there's nothing else hiding out there, but I think we've caught the big one at this point, which I'm so disappointed that it occurred. I just can't believe we weren't able to figure this out sooner, but it's, you know, when you've had a process in place and you're adding 500 accounts a year, it's been quite a challenge. All right. AT&T cellular network major issue. Can we establish strong cellular service in Mountain House? Now we do have the tower over at the water plant, who we gave a pretty good deal to back in 2012. And I know they are over time adding more carriers. In fact, I think I just signed a right of entry for them the other day when they were doing some maintenance. But we do have, I think there is a new owner now for that tower who's got more connections with the folks, but we unfortunately don't control that. And until we're a municipality, it'd be real difficult for us to figure out how to get in that business to start out with. So does having a lien on the house impact when we sell the house? So the lien does not impact your credit, but if you sell the house and we put a lien on for the undercharges, the lien gets paid out of escrow, you know, or if you do a refi. So those are things we're looking at. We're looking at the pros and cons of the lien. And so for those who were undercharged, we're going to have a follow-up dialogue regarding that lien issue, because we really do understand all the negative side effects of that. So again, we need to have it on the microphone so the other folks can hear it. Okay. It's just going to stay there. It's going to stay there. All right. So I'm sorry. Very good. So on that lien, we're not going to be charging any interest or anything on that lien. just like there's no interest on the refunds. There's no interest involved. Well, will you continue to use Infomark? We're gonna go through a competitive bid process this fall and select a user again in the spring. And again, we're probably going to split out, or at least seriously consider splitting out the utility billing from the utility operation. What are chances this will happen again? As close to zero as possible. Sarah's promised me she'll be here another 25 years and it's not gonna happen during that time, so. How is the CSD able to credit account for those who are overcharged, but those who are undercharged have to be manually added? We're still working through the mechanics of how we're adding in the undercharges, but I think we are working with our billing company to make sure that it won't be a manual addition to make, again, that was one of the things we talked about last night, to make sure it's gonna be very simple and seamless for the undercharge. Has a class action suit already been filed? Not that I know of, and I don't see any server out there waiting for me right now. Why can't we get a check when we drop off the notary form? Well, first of all, we don't process checks here. The county processes the checks. And as I mentioned earlier, to avoid any disputes over who is getting the check, we're gonna do it as a credit to the account. And again, we run into so many, people are so unfamiliar with paper checks these days. You have no idea how many times we have to chase people down to cash checks. Everybody is used to doing things electronically. Infomark bill never shows zoning dates. How did someone figure it out? They asked a lot of questions. That's how they figured it out. They asked a lot of questions, and we are here now. And I guess the good news is we figured it out now, and this didn't happen 3 years from now. And I wish we had been the ones to find it out. We didn't, but I'm glad somebody in the community did figure it out so we can move on to other challenges that we have in the community, such as remove poplar trees and sidewalks and all the normal things that we deal with. This has been an interesting experience for staff. We've all dealt a lot with utility issues in the past, but again, nothing like this. So particularly for those who were undercharged, where it's been real tricky to figure these things out, we apologize. We're going to keep communicating and make sure that on the one hand, we're making sure that we're meeting our fiduciary duties, but we don't want to create any hardship if we can help it. So that's really our biggest challenge. It's 36, for the undercharge, it's a 36-month payment schedule to repay the 3 years underpayment during that time. For overcharge, that'll be an immediate credit to your account. As soon as it's notarized, the next month, it'll all be a credit against your account. So you probably won't have a bill for, depending on your circumstance, you may not have you'll have a credit on your account instead of amount due, depending on how much water you use during that time. And so we're going to try to get those expedited. We've got extra notaries on call, ready to go, so we can get that done, because we know the notary stuff is a real pain in the neck. Okay, so if we're only required to pay back 1 year and you decide to pay back 3 years, then aren't you gifting 2 years? If you can gift 3 years, then why can't you gift the undercharge? Well, I think we are, because the vast majority of the undercharges go back far more than 3 years. In fact, I believe on that one chart, there were more, for most of the first 10, 12 years of the district, there were more undercharges than overcharges. So I think it all balances out at the end of the day between the overcharges and the undercharges, I think. Like I said, I think there were only 2 in 2003, so it got most of them right. But I think everything in 2003 was basically the same. Everything was a low density that year, so it was hard to make a lot of mistakes that year. So I think we've got all the questions. I'm gonna wrap up the virtual presentation. Oh, one more, okay. But minute here, I'll wrap up the virtual presentation, and then if people have one-on-one questions, we're here to answer your questions. And our board president again is here as well. Okay. Okay. So again, it's the question of how could you identify the error? Well, again, that's why I'm surprised that no one came in sooner. Again, it's not their fault, but I am surprised with the number of errors that started happening, particularly on 2016, 17. I am really surprised that nobody came in, sat down and said, prove to me this bill is right. It didn't happen until last year. And so you somewhat always assume when you really screw something up, somebody's gonna figure it out sooner or later. It's shocking that it took 19 years. But again, if you look, there were very, very few mistakes until we got into the RMH lots, where there was all this confusion on the medium, high density lots. And I am pretty confident that when we did this next bond and I got the printout, I would have gotten a printout of how many units were in the RMH. I think I'm pretty good at knowing how many units we build a year. I think we would have probably caught it by this spring, one way or another. I didn't catch it in 2020 because there was a lag in the data we had of what was completed construction, but I'm pretty sure we would have caught it this spring because when we issue the bonds, we have a pretty exhaustive process we have to go through to calculate how many units are in each area. But back in 2020, I noticed the number was a little low, but a lot of the units weren't occupied yet. So so it didn't trigger. Now, of course, it triggers in my brain now, like, why the heck didn't you catch it then? But the bottom line is it got caught. We're gonna fix it and we're gonna move on. We're gonna make sure it doesn't happen again. And then we're gonna focus on making sure we always have water. So any other questions? All right, thank you to everybody. How many people did we have online? 36. All right, thanks. And so again, we're here as long as you want for individual questions. And you've got the people on email that can do that. Thank you very much for coming. Hopefully it's not raining up there now. Although every day it rains, I can tell you it's a good day and not. So every rainy season gives us another year to buffer ourselves against things. They did not ourselves. So it was really hard when I wasn't there. I started even though we came up with the playground. We are in this.